seems to, in terms of an area of compromise, that whether you call it a wall or not.
That is the obvious compromise. And the question is whether he can set himself up to claim victory. He needs a way out of this thing that doesn't burn him with his base. I mean, this language that he used and these sort of, again, we're back to before the election, you know, the threat of the caravan, this overheated language, this mythology that, you know, there's massive amounts of crime being committed by undocumented immigrants as compared to people who live here. That was for the base. At the end, as Gloria suggests, he left an opening that could be a pivot to a solution to them.
Look, I think this was an incredibly conciliatory speech. I mean, I just looked at the issues that he covered. There's no, other than the wall, there's not a single beat, and the bill, on the pro-life bill, which, in the face of what Democrats are now proposing, which is the Virginia governor infanticide, which was mentioned in the speech, that's a modest thing, and used to be supported by Democrats, by the way. There's no red meat for the base.
Prescription drug benefits, for example.
That's not red meat for the base.
Not at all.
You can go on down this list. This was a very much of, okay, I'm willing to work here. This is not a Republican speech. Rick Santorum isn't cheering. I mean, I'm cheering the images, and you feel good about it. And I think that was his outreach to America, but particularly to conservatives.
What weren't you cheering? That's what I'm interested in. A lot of the things he said were the things that you suggested he should say before the speech. What is it that you found unacceptable to you as someone in the president's base?
All I'm saying is there's nothing here that if you look at infrastructure,
which he barely touched.
He barely touched infrastructure. He talks about AIDS. Look, I helped write the global AIDS proposal in PEPFAR, so all in. But that was not something conservatives are going to be cheering about tomorrow. So I'm just saying that if you look at what the concrete proposals he put forward, there is not a lot of conservative. There's a lot of outreach to the anti-Pelosi Democrats.
I see it very, very differently. I saw this as a psychotically incoherent speech with cookies and dog poop. He tries to put together in the same speech these warm, kind things about humanitarianism and caring about children. At the same time, he is demonizing people who are immigrants in a way that was appalling.
Demonizing child trafficking.
Hold on a second. There were people in that gallery who were children who had been torn away from their mothers at the border. He did not mention them. There were soldiers who were transgender who had been thrown out of the military. He didn't mention them. There are people there are veterans. He talked about veterans. There are veterans who he has thrown out of this country who are dreamers. He did not mention them, and he didn't say one positive thing. Listen. If you want to talk about the people he could have mentioned,
so he's not mentioning is a bad speech.
And then what
he's supposed to mention everybody. You want him to mention?
No. Listen. If you're going to talk about immigration, you're going to talk about undocumented people. Then talk
and
about
make his case.
No, hold on a second. Then talk about the one who drowned, saving people in Houston after the storm. Talk about the people who've given their lives to this country. You guys see this very differently. You're looking at it from the point of view of.
I got to just toss to Wolf because we have to set up the Democratic response. But we'll come back. We'll continue this discussion. It's an important one. Wolf?
Yeah, Anderson, the president spoke for about an hour and 20 minutes. And, Jake, we're going to get the Democratic response now from the former Georgia House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams, who ran for the gubernatorial contest in Georgia and lost, not by a lot, but she did lose.
She did, and then it was a very disappointing loss for Democrats. They really thought they had a chance of capturing that governor's mansion with Stacey Abrams. They had a lot of hopes invested in her. Barack Obama campaigned for her. Oprah Winfrey campaigned for her. But ultimately, she was considered a star in the Democratic Party. People really looking forward to her address.
Her carefully prepared remarks will be a lot shorter than the president's. Here's Stacey Abrams delivering the Democratic response.
Good evening, my fellow Americans, and happy Lunar New Year. I'm Stacey Abrams, and I'm honored to join the conversation about the state of our union. Growing up, my family went back and forth between lower middle class and working class. Yet even when they came home weary and bone-tired, my parents found a way to show us all who we could be. My librarian mother taught us to love learning. My father, a shipyard worker, put in overtime and extra shifts, and they made sure we volunteered to help others. Later, they both became United Methodist ministers, an expression of the faith that guides us. These were our family values: faith, service, education, and responsibility. Now, we only had one car, so sometimes my dad had to hitchhike and walk long stretches during the 30-mile trip home from the shipyards. One rainy night, my mom got worried. We piled in the car and went out looking for him, and we eventually found my dad making his way along the road, soaked and shivering in his shirt sleeve. He explained, when we ask for power and strength is possible to succeed, will come for us. It is this mandate for Governor, and I stand here tonight upon for the shutdown was a stunt. Our values. To realize Americans educators, economics, the Republican tax bill rigged the system and their families. Americans take action on climate change, defend individual liberties with fair-minded judges. But none of these ambitions are possible without the bedrock guarantee of our right to vote. Let's be clear. Voter suppression is real. From making it harder to register and stay on the rolls, to moving and closing polling places, to rejecting lawful ballots, we can no longer ignore these. Acknowledge the resolution here in Georgia. I did not, and we cannot accept efforts to undermine our right to vote. That's why I started a nonpartisan organization called Fair Fight to advocate for voting rights. This is the next battle for our day about the vision we want for our country. We must reject the cynicism that says allowing every eligible vote to be cast and counted is a power grab. Americans understand that these are the values our brave men and women in uniform and our veterans risk their lives to defend. The foundation of our moral leadership around the globe is free and fair elections, where voters pick their leaders, not where politicians pick their voters. In this time of division and crisis, we must come together and stand for and with one another. America has stumbled time and again on its quest towards justice and equality. But with each generation, we have revisited our fundamental truths, and where we falter, we make amends. We fought Jim Crow with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Yet we continue to confront racism from our past and in our present, which is why we must hold everyone from the highest offices to our own families accountable for racist words and deeds, and call racism what it is: wrong. America achieved a measure of reproductive justice in Roe v. Wade, but we must never forget it is immoral to allow politicians to harm women and families to advance a political agenda. We affirmed marriage equality, and yet the LGBTQ community remains under attack. So, even as I am very disappointed by the president's approach to our problems, I still don't want him to fail. But we need him to tell the truth, and to respect his duties, and respect the extraordinary diversity that defines America. Our progress has always been found in the refuge, in the basic instinct of the American experiment, to do right by our people. And with a renewed commitment to social and economic justice, we will create a stronger America together. Because America wins by fighting for our shared values against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is who we are. And when we do so, never wavering, the state of our union will always be strong. Thank you, and may God bless the United States of America.
The Democratic response being given by Stacey Abrams, a former gubernatorial candidate in the state of Georgia. I like that one better.
Me too.
I'm sure you like that better.
Neil, I'll say this: brevity is the soul of wit.
Yeah, it was very conversational, right? I mean, I think one of the problems are sitting in a room by themselves,
or gasping for water, or
gasping for water, like Rubio. I think standing there. speech style was really is essentially saying what the Democratic Party stands for.
In
right?
terms of
talking about values, go ahead.
In terms of what the president said,
Yeah,
I'm wondering what you made of it, because we had right before we went to Stacey Abrams, we had a disagreement from over here on exactly how bipartisan it was. How did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some areas he talks about that we've been talking about for a while that could possibly be bipartisan areas of agreement: paid family leave, infrastructure.
Not the case. I mean,
that's not his program.
Right, that's not his policy.
Not his policy.
Anderson, here's the way I see this. It's sort of what I thought would come. First of all, there was a lot of signals to the base. Let me tell you what I think they were. First of all, the economy. Talking about cutting all the regulations, what they did to cut taxes, the fact that the economy is doing well. That was aimed not just at the base, but Republicans who don't like some of the things he does, but they feel like, well, the economy's doing okay. When he talked about caravans, the wall, and used a lot of rhetoric there, that's right at the base.
It'll break the fact check machine, some of it.
You know, when he attacked socialism, we're not socialists. He's a conservative. Yeah. He's right about that.
Chuck Schumer plotted.
And I got you. But in abortion, that language was geared at the evangelical community, which is one of his strongest bases. Now, but there was an outreach. I mean, when he talked about criminal justice reform, he talked about infrastructure, cancer research for children. That was pretty significant. Taken on the drug issue. But here's really what it comes down to. For any political leader, whether they're a president, a governor, an executive, you have to compromise. And the question is, what is his definition of compromise? It can't be, it's my way or you're all a bunch of knuckleheads. So well, what we have to watch. One of the things that was interesting. One of the things that was
interesting.
One thing we want to watch is, what are are we going to see an end to the ad hominem tweets?
No,
if we do not. But here's the point. No, I mean, if he says, I want to work with you, I want to get along with you, I want to compromise, if those things continue, you see, that takes away from everything that he tried to say in a unifying way. Do I think he's going to stop doing it? I hope not. Would I bet on it? Of course not.
This speech was gaslighting the American people by starting out with this sort of unifying stuff about veterans, et cetera, the salting of the ground, saying it's going to be a unifying speech. Yeah. He's going to ask for compromise. So he starts that way, and then he goes into abortion. He goes into immigration. He talks about open borders. No Democrat is talking about open borders. It was a divisive speech in the middle, starting with the military and ending with the military. But let me just say one word about the delivery. He had such, to me, low energy. He's not a great speech giver when he's on a teleprompter. It was not well delivered. Stacey Abrams, on the other hand, starting with an anecdote about her family, it brought us in immediately. She had energy. She smiled. She, even when delivering some tough stuff, the contrast between these two, I think, was striking.
I have to speak next. Okay. Because I'm going to agree with Jennifer Grant.
What?
Oh, my God.
See, the president, this whole unity thing is taking hold here.
Wait,
your career's finished.
I know. I'm just thinking, what did I say?
Stacey gave a great speech. She delivered it well. This was probably the worst delivered speech I've heard Donald Trump give. He ran over his lines. He mixed up the lines. He didn't deliver his punchlines.
Jammed in.
He would deliver a line and go to the next issue, and I don't think he even realized he was moving on to the next issue.
There wasn't a paragraph.
Someone didn't do a good job of breaking his speech so he knew what to do. That was a problem. Now, where I don't agree with Jennifer is the president. I counted. You know how many things the president proposed in domestic policy tonight? Now, Bill Clinton, I would sit through this speech, and it'd be an encyclopedia of proposals. Stacey Abrams, in 4 minutes, proposed 40 things. In an hour and a half, Donald Trump proposed 8 domestic policies. 8! The entire night.
But you saw
and 2 of those 8 were child cancer and AIDS. So, I mean, this was not a big speech. This was not we're going to change everything. This was, I've got my targeted thing.
Let me tell you what.
A couple for the base, a couple for the other side, and this is what I want to do.
What my heartbreak in the speech was simply this. Those beautiful moments where he recognized Miss Alice Johnson, where he recognized you saw a hunger in that crowd. I felt it in myself. People wanted to come together. People wanted to feel that sense of unity. And then he would go right into something else that would just pull people apart. So when I say There's some struggle happening in that building. I don't know if it's happening in his heart, but there's some struggle happening in that building. That's where if you could literally take out those positive inspirational moments and nobody could criticize that speech. But the parts of that speech that were divisive were so divisive.
John and I
so
have been, you've been to 18, I've been to 16. I have sat on my hands for a lot of Democratic speeches that just, they were punching me in the nose sitting there in the Congress. So don't say that a State of the Union speech is not all flowers and kisses to try to get everybody to.
We agree about one thing, which is that the moment with the women
was great.
That was a great moment.
An awesome moment.
He didn't get it right away, but he eventually
I'm
got it.
not sure he still gets it, because the irony about it is that they all are there because they ran.
Initially, he did. They were
high-fiving.
He didn't get it right away, but he definitely.
Can I just say something on the issue of body language? Because, Governor, you raise a important point. Whatever the words in the speech, and we can argue, and I think there were some unbelievably divisive places there and some unifying pieces there. The question is, what is credible and what is not? What does he believe and what does he not believe? And part of what I noticed was he oriented his body, the entire speech, toward the Republicans. He wasn't speaking to the Democrats. He sort of turned himself in that moment that you spoke of, and about with the women, didn't know quite how to deal with it. And, on this point of unity and what it takes to compromise and so on, it was just 2 days ago that he said people are dying all over the country because of people like Nancy Pelosi. That's not unifying language.
Well, and she spent most of her time biting her lip.
Yeah,
I would say.
She doesn't have a good
Can I
poker
just say
face.
one thing about divisiveness here that really struck me, and it was on the immigration issue, which we've spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's a theme he's going to strike in 2020 if nothing really significant happens. But he described the divide on immigration in class terms, that it was a division between the working class and America's political class, and started talking about, the political class lives behind walls because they're rich, but the working class are losing jobs, they're getting lower wages, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, of course, that's divisive. It's not the way the immigration debate is being handled by Democrats, but I can see this as a 2020 talking point for Donald Trump.
That's Santorum politics.
That's exactly right. This is what I was talking about back in 2012 when I talked about the Republicans.
So prescient.
The Republicans don't care. The Republicans didn't care. George Bush was all for more immigration. Why? Because he was worried about the business community having enough labor to take care of the needs of the business community. And the Democrats didn't care because they just want all the people they can because they're going to vote for him. And the working men and women, that's what Donald Trump tapped into, and he's trying to tap into.
And partly there's a racial component to that, too, right? I mean, if you think about where immigrants are in some of these inner cities and African Americans.
And that's an appeal.
Yeah, I think that's an appeal. I mean, it's a divisive appeal, but I think it's what he's going to make.
Very soon whether he really is interested in some compromise. And if he's not, and we're going to know it very soon, then it'll be base politics. And he will double down on the base and double down on the base.
You're assuming Nancy Pelosi is going to get money for a wall.
Well, I mean, there's got to be, that's called compromise.
I agree with you.
But I'm saying to you that he's going to have to move.
Let me just say,
and if he doesn't move, then we're back to the base. Yeah, I agree with that. And then we go back to the base politics. And they'll think they can win on that, David. I don't think you can win. Maybe they will. But
let me say the way I would rephrase what we were just talking about is there's what I would call a phony populism. Sherrod Brown talks about a phony populism, where you appeal to the working people and you say your situation is awful, and you know who I'm going to blame? I'm not going to blame Big Pharma. I'm not going to blame big corporations. I'm not going to blame dumb politicians. I'm going to blame these brown people stealing your job. Now, yes, that can work, but it divides the country because at the end of the day, it's not a true story. The reason that the working class people in this country are struggling and our wages are low is not because you have sectors and whole parts of the country where you have almost no immigration and people still can't pay their bills and they're working 2 or 3 jobs. So, yes, somebody could sell some phony populism on this thing and divide people, but I hope the Democrats figure out some way to unite people.
John, we haven't heard from you on it.
Just a couple of things. One, back to the Stacey Abrams speech. That's a very difficult job. That's the best response, Democrat or Republican, I can remember in some years. It's a very difficult job. It's a thankless job. But also you learn about the differences between the two parties. She talked about voting rights. She talked about climate change. And she talked about guns. We did not hear any of those subjects from the President of the United States. Democrats believe that animates their coalition. They believe it helps them. And they believe, especially on the issue of climate change, especially on the issue of voting rights, it helps them to talk about things the President won't talk about. You can shrug all you want.
I mean, Republicans don't support any of those things. Why would you talk about it?
Well, all Americans should want our president, whatever the disagreements are, just look at his own national security review. Every leader, whatever your party, should be talking about climate change. It's just, you could have a debate about what to do about it. But that the President of the United States at this moment in the world did not mention climate change in even a sentence is just, frankly, a disgrace. Any president, Democrat or Republican. Just so you know, but back to the president and what the governor was just saying. Look, the president has to make a choice. This town, sadly, and you have to make sure that in the last 20 years, it can only do one thing. Sometimes it can't even do one thing at a time. So the president has to make a choice. If we stay in this immigration debate, that's all we are going to do. We'll have another potential government shutdown in 2 weeks, or he'll sign something to keep the government open, then declare the national emergency. It will end up in court, and any goodwill that was built tonight, any potential opening that was built tonight will be gone. Does he want to? And David can remember this in the early days of the Obama administration. They went with the stimulus plan, then they came with health care. Everyone said, I thought Obama was going to unite us. And we can argue about who's to blame for what or the other thing, but the town just went like that. So will the president cut a deal? Accept a compromise? Can he get, you're right, he would have to get Speaker Pelosi to put something on the table to get it, and then say, let's do infrastructure, or let's do prescription drugs, or are we going to stay in this wall or nothing conversation for another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Because if we do, forget any of this other stuff getting done.
You know that the conference committee, the people working on this whole round, apparently to Camp David, to kind of talk this all through with they're definitely going to put something in there.
Sure.
To mollify him. Is he willing to take it?
Yes.
Is it enough? Or is he just going to say, I don't know? No.
If it's
No disrespect to Mick Mulvaney, but we work in a town now where even the Republicans aren't sure that the chief of staff speaks for the president of the United States. They're not sure his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, speaks for the president of the United States. They're not sure the vice president speaks for the president of the United States on these issues. They need to hear it from him.
God invented the fig leaf so politicians could have something to hide behind so they can declare victory. And I'm thinking he's going to look for a fig leaf. Maybe not. I don't know. Gloria, you don't think so?
I don't know. Every time I think Donald Trump is going to do something and compromise, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
He should do that because this is a loser for him.
It is.
But he hasn't always been willing to do that because he's worried about getting hectored by his base.
But on the wall, he's already saying the wall is being built. I mean, he's already, if you are listening to what he's saying, we are building new wall. We have new contracts going out. We are spending money on it. The wall is being built, and it just, you know.
And why shut down the government?
So, but we might not accept some sort of compromise if you're already saying it's being built.
Look, I think it's easy to get money. Nobody really should object to barriers where barriers, and I don't think any Democrats do. So I think it's easy to come to a point of agreement if the president, who's rejected these kinds of things before, is willing to do it and feels that his base will allow him to do it.
Give the president a win on that? If the president can say, look,
I think probably what happens is Democrats will do what I just said, which is barriers are needed in places where barriers are needed. We're not going to build unnecessary walls as a symbol, but we all agree there's a range of things we need to do on border security, and barriers are a piece of it.
But doesn't keep Democrats as the punching bag.
There's some weaknesses that President Trump showed by what he didn't talk about. He did not talk about the shutdown. He did not talk about the furloughed workers. That shows some weakness. He did not talk. He has done, sticking with the NRA, of shutting the government down. He's obviously not proud of, or he knows they're political losers because he didn't talk about them, didn't defend them, didn't brag on them at all. And so it's not just what he says, what he doesn't say. You gotta watch.
We gotta let's go over to Jake and Wolf. Jake.
Thanks, Anderson. One of the moments that got a lot of grimacing and other negative reactions from Democrats was when President Trump referred to the partisan investigations. In fact, I think the quote was ridiculous. Congressman Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who is conducting an investigation. I know you would say it's neither partisan nor ridiculous. I want you to take a listen to what President Trump exactly said.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations.
Now, the president's being investigated, and he and his family and his associates and his campaign and his inaugural committee are all being investigated by various different organizations. The Mueller group, the Southern District of New York, the Manhattan District Attorney, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, and your committee. I don't know which one he was referring to, maybe all. What was your reaction?
Well, when he started that sentence by the only thing that can get in the way of the economy is ridiculous, I thought he would have said ridiculous government shutdowns because that had the most demonstrable negative impact on the economy. Look, this is a president who's had 2 years of getting used to no oversight whatsoever by the Congress. A Congress that was essentially not even a rubber stamp, but no stamp at all. It was just absent. And so he is bridling under the fact that with a Democratic majority, we're going to do our job. We're going to be a co-equal branch of government. We're not going to turn and look the other way when we see corruption or malfeasance. And we're going to get to the bottom of what Russia has done. We're going to get to the bottom of whether the Russians still possess financial leverage over the president. We would be negligent in not doing so.
And you're working with the Republicans on your committee, so it is a bipartisan investigation?
Well, it started out as a bipartisan investigation, and then the Republicans decided to shut it down. We will invite them to rejoin the investigation. It's my hope that they will. We'll find out in very short order.
Dana has a question for you, I think.
Well, I want to drill down on something that Jake was talking about. The Southern District of New York, CNN reported, I'm sure you saw today, that the prosecutors up there in New York have requested interviews with executives at the Trump organization. What do you make of that?
Well, a couple things. So, first, we in our committee has shared the concern that there may have been foreign money put into the inauguration through the inauguration committee through straw purchasers. We know that happened in part. We don't know the extent that may have happened. But it's part of a broader phenomenon that we have seen of people very close to the president, maybe the president's own family, trying to capitalize, trying to make money on his position, on the office. And here, the head of the inauguration committee, if this memo can be believed, if it's accurate, was also trying to exploit for financial benefit his work on the inauguration. So we are looking into this. Other offices, obviously, the Southern District or others are looking into this as well. It may also be a result of the fact that there's clearly an effort to shut down the Mueller investigation. And by these other offices taking this up, we can make sure that those who are responsible for breaking the law are brought to justice.
An effort to shut down the Mueller investigation different from what we've seen before? Is there something new that you're referring to?
We've seen pressure from the White House all along to shut down Mueller. And we saw recently Matt Whitaker, this handpicked acting attorney general, who talked about how he could privately cripple the Mueller investigation, saying publicly that it was coming to an end. Now, he shouldn't be speaking for the Mueller investigation. That may be his way of trying to pressure Mueller to wind things up.
Congressman Schiff, you heard the president say specifically tonight he wants a border wall. He said that walls work, walls saves lives, but he also said he wants a compromise. Are Democrats willing to compromise and provide at least some funds for what he calls barriers? Forget about the word walls, barriers, at least along part of the border with Mexico.
Oh, we are certainly ready to find common ground on border security, and I hope that this group of members that are working together will be able to do that. Indeed, before he shut down the government, we had agreed on bipartisan funding for border security. But the problem here is we're not negotiating amongst ourselves in Congress. We're really negotiating where the ultimate client is apparently Rush Limbaugh or Ann Coulter. And what the president says, or his people say, don't necessarily bind their position if he gets too much blowback. So whether we can reach a deal that's going to be acceptable to these conservative pundits, I doubt. But we are ready to work in a bipartisan way, and indeed, we've already done that in the past.
Well, let's see what happens over the next few days. Congressman Schiff, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Anderson, back to you.
All right, well, thanks very much. Back now. Van, what was the quote you said earlier? This was a psychotically
incoherent speech that mixed cookies with dog poop. Is that what you mean?
That's the one, yeah.
Where'd you steal that from?
I can't tell you how hurt it is, how hurt people feel. I know that for some people, immigration is just an issue. It's like, well, this is good for the base, or it's this policy thing, or somebody made a vote. You have people living in real fear on a daily basis in this country, and they feel the President of the United States is licensing a kind of hatred against them. Everybody's algorithm shows them something different in their feed. I'm always seeing these videos of people going into Walmart and people yelling at them and saying, get out of the country, in front of their children. and abusing them because they feel that they've been licensed now to do that. And so for me, I mean, I wanted to just talk about criminal justice reform because we worked so hard, and I saw I saw a different Trump when he was talking about that. And I watched Donald Trump personally move on that issue over a 6-month period of time. I saw the impact on Donald Trump of seeing Miss Alice Johnson come home. He talks about that video of her running across the street and hugging her children. Every time I talk to him, I know that side of him. And for him to go directly from that into, again, attacking the immigrants, for me, it was just heartbreaking. And it causes real pain for real people. And I don't want us to treat this outside of the humanity of other parts of the speech. Don't tell me people coming home from prison are good people. People coming home from prison, I can give you a second chance. I see your humanity. And then turn right around and snatch babies from mama at the border and not say a mumbling word. And snatch paychecks from furloughed workers and not say a mumbling word. That part, that's what I was trying to put. These two things that don't go together were together in that speech. And I think it was unfortunate.
Van, any immigration compromise here should extend the right of DACA, either to resolve DACA and extend TPS. That has to be a part of this. There's one other thing. Everybody keeps talking about the wall. The problem that we're facing with many of these things are located in these countries that are our neighbors. And we're not doing enough to help them to solve their problem, whether it's economic aid or security aid. But I believe that the DACA folks, that should be done. And it should be part of this deal. TPS, I don't know how you figure all that out, but we don't want these people living under fear every day that they're going to have to leave.
Senator Santorum on DACA.
Look, I think there's a compromise that will include some element of DACA, some element of these TPA folks.
The thrill in your voice, though, is
look, it's a compromise. It should, I mean, I don't know too many people who get thrilled when you compromise, but you do it.
You think he will?
And that's the whole idea. You need to do it, and I think the president will do it. But Van, to suggest that when the president and Republicans and conservatives care about the security of our border, care about people coming into this country and committing crimes, as we saw pointed out by the 3 women in the audience whose grandparents were killed, those are real issues too. That's real pain too. That's real fear too. There are people who are afraid and have a reason to be afraid because their neighborhoods aren't safe.
But you
because there are people here doing things that are harmful.
Senator,
so the idea that you throw a few videos that some people are afraid because you have an idiot at Walmart yelling at somebody, and I would agree, it's an idiot. It could be 100. It's wrong. I condemn it. The president will condemn it.
No, he hasn't. Senator, let me.
You think the president would not condemn someone?
This is happening.
What do you mean
across,
he hasn't?
It's happening across the country. People with MAGA hats on, unfortunately, doing this. You talk about it differently. Listen, you have a similar politics of the head with Donald Trump, but a different politics of the heart. I don't hear you saying the kinds of things about people that he does. I disagree with you on policy, but I can understand where you're coming from. The way the president talks about it causes people to feel that people who are here undocumented are less than. And that's wrong. And I think your faith and my faith prohibits that.
All I would say is I would agree with you that the president's rhetoric at times is incendiary and at times can give a bad impression of what the president's policies are. And John goes crazy when he does it. I go crazy when he does it. But the reality is what the president's put out there on immigration is a reasonable proposal. And I'm hopeful.
You mean tonight? You're talking about tonight?
What he talked about.
Let me ask you a question. This story has surfaced in the last few days about the fact that the president himself has, as a policy in his business, hired undocumented workers in all of his, at many of his properties. And so,
and that goes back to the building of Trump Tower.
Now, he obviously doesn't feel like he's subjecting his guests to the threat of violence. He hires them probably because he thinks they're good workers. So how do you square all of that? And isn't that a political problem for him?
I would agree that it's a political problem, and it goes to the point that I was making earlier, which is Republicans don't mind illegal immigration because it provides a supply of workforce that may be a lot cheaper than what you would get otherwise. And that's why we have E-Verify. And I know the Trump organization now is going to use E-Verify, but they should have been using it from the beginning and should have set an example. And I do think it's a black eye for the president not to.
I have another question. Can I ask you guys?
Of course.
which is, can you understand? I think you probably can, but I'm not sure if you can. Can you understand? Can you understand?
Back to the same relationship.
I know,
you guys are doing so well.
Yeah. I know. Well,
one time I agree with her, she turns on.
And maybe you'll agree with me, but can you understand how people who, Democrats and people who are supporting the immigrant community, who hear what the president says about a wall and about border security, but when the whole purpose is security, and Democrats are saying, we are willing to give you border security, and we're willing to do it in the smartest way. You have El Chapo in prison right now, and drugs were being smuggled in a tunnel. A wall's not going to stop that. Democrats want to be able to give a smart deal, not a deal that's just a wall, which seems to us like a campaign promise that was for the purpose of his base and alienates brown people, right? But alienates all people, at least on my side. But can you understand why, though? Can you understand why Democrats hate the wall and are willing to border security, and we don't understand why Republicans don't see that?
Just say yes.
Yes, I understand.
I'll turn.
Hold on, no. Yes, I understand it, but that's not what the president's proposing. What the president has proposed and has been proposing is much more than just a wall. And so the idea that the president is only proposing a wall, he has never just proposed a wall. He says, as part of a bigger package of border security, I need components of a wall because I think that is critical. You may not agree with that.
No, but he is insisting on a wall because that was a promise he made in the campaign.
You were a governor. When you ran on something and you made that a central point.
But border security was my promise.
I feel like I'm back in the debates here.
Getting left out?
But what about a bigger issue? Like comprehensive immigration reform? What about a guest worker program? What about things that make sense in addition to border security?
Hello?
But and one other thing I think it's really important. We cannot have family separation at the border where these children are being taken from
change the law.
Well, look, the fact is you don't want to have a policy that says, well, if we have that, maybe people won't come. The law needs to be changed. Comprehensive immigration reform, have some security at the border, but we can all agree that what is happening now to these children is terrible. They're separated. We don't know where they are.
Change the law to allow them to be like Mexicans coming over to be returned to the country. Yeah. Right now, they can't be returned. So that's the problem. Yeah. And in the law,
let's just fix it. Let's go fix it.
You can make this case in the Republican primary. There's one available coming up pretty soon. No, I don't ask the question to be a jerk, though, in the sense that does anybody at the table believe, I know from time to time he has said it, but given the history of the last 2 years, that this president of the United States would sign legislation, you say comprehensive immigration reform, to Democrats because they control the House now. When they were in the minority, they might have taken a different deal. They control the House now. To them, that means citizenship for the dreamers. Do you believe this president, who, as the senator rightly says, ran on this issue, would sign that legislation heading into his 2020 reelection?
No.
Is there anything on the table?
Well, look, hope always springs eternal, right?
No.
That maybe, but I don't see that happening. But I don't even know if the Congress, look, here's what's happening in the country. The Democrats are concerned about being primaried from the left, and the Republicans are concerned about being primaried from the right. And all they're doing is trying to protect their stake and protect their reelection. At some point, leaders will emerge who will come with a program that will be comprehensive, that will bring out the best.
But these conversations about these big, huge comprehensives that people are having now, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of oxygen. It's not going to happen.
But look, it's like healthcare reform. You just can't do it little. You can do it little piecemeal, but it has to be thought of in a bigger way. And then what is the time that it takes to get there? But if you don't start the legitimate debate, then the time doesn't get run through the clock.
But they're having the debate. I mean, they are having a debate.
Then put some bills in that are comprehensive.
Some people, like Lindsey Graham, as you know, wanted to years ago, and the Senate passed it. And then it died. And
nothing gets brought to the floor now unless it's cooked.
Right. And the president, I don't believe the president would sign comprehensive immigration reform.
It would be wrong.
And to me, underlying everything tonight is, what can you believe that the president said tonight? What can you believe that he's really going to do? I mean, that he's proposed all these things. A lot of them.
He hasn't proposed very many things.
Well, you know, prescription drug benefits, family and medical leave, and all the rest
Eliminating
of it.
HIV.
Eliminating HIV/AIDS by 2030.
Yeah, 10 years.
And he also said, which sort of struck me, that you have to reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution. Well, Donald Trump, what
Actually,
about
that? Got a big hand from Nancy Pelosi.
Right, exactly. But what about that? Can I believe that Donald Trump, who talks about getting his enemies, who has always talked about that, will give up retribution the way he behaved after the 2018 election, for example, talking about Mia Love?
Right.
I mean, can I believe that? Should I believe that?
Right, where 24 hours previously he had said
show
that
me,
Nancy...
don't tell me.
Exactly.
Show me and just don't tell me.
Yeah,
we'll
so
see.
State of the
We're
Union
all talking about all night.
Speeches are tell me, but the world starts tomorrow, and you got to show me. Absolutely right.
That's right. One thing about the Stacey Abrams speech that was interesting to me, and I agree, John, that is a horrible job. Like, you should get an unlisted number if you think you're going to be asked to give the response to the State of the Union, because it almost always is a failure, and I think she did very well.
Very well.
Yeah. But a lot of the themes that she struck were themes that were common to those Democratic candidates who won in 2018. And, you know, so I think that she was hitting a lot of resonant
Can I say something?
themes.
Yeah, I mean, it's something of a miracle that happened in that she still has a political career. I mean, usually that is the beginning of a very bad couple of years for you. And the fact that you have Stacey Abrams stand up there, nobody's making fun of her, nobody's saying anything bad about her, she's not a meme, and the stuff that she talked about I think actually resonated. As you look out into that chamber in the Senate and the House, and again, there's 300 people there and 400 people running for office. If you look out there, I hope they were taking notes tonight, not on Donald Trump, but on Stacey Abrams, because I do think that there's a way to talk about the working class. By the way, undocumented workers are a part of the working class. Immigrants are a part of the working class. Women are a part of the working class. There is a way to talk about the working class in a way that brings people together. I thought Stacey Abrams did a great job of that tonight.
I would say, as I agreed with the governor, that she delivered a very good speech. She delivered the substance of the speech is one that is mainstream, left-wing, progressive, just craziness in my opinion. Okay, but she delivered it well. Okay? No, look, I mean,
that didn't seem like a compliment.
Right. Well, no, but she has great stories. She wove them in. I mean, she is very, very good at. She's a great communicator for the Democratic side. The substance of it, I mean, I don't buy at all. But what she said,
I mean, just as a matter of pure politics, a lot of the positions, whether it's on student loans or health care or so on, the things she talked about were things that were on which Democrats have a majority view in this country. I mean, this position that the president's taken on the wall is not a majority view. That's not something she geared in on. But, you know, the positions he took on health care during the last 2 years were not majority positions. And there are a series of things that he did that caused some of them were behavioral, as you've mentioned before, but caused the Republican Party to suffer great setbacks in the fall of 2018. And she was keying into some of those things in a way that I think suggests
those ideas are not just popular anymore with left-wing folks. You talk about it as craziness, but listen, Medicare for all, incredibly popular. However you get there.
We'll wait and see how
the Green New Deal is popular. A lot of this stuff is incredibly popular. How you get there is an issue.
The rhetoric is popular. The policies,
I think you guys are going to for the Republican Party.
2020.
In my opinion, one challenge is not just 2020, but beyond. Are the Republicans able to generate really good, new, exciting ideas? If you take the issue of the division between the growing gap between the rich and the poor, or the economic divide, so they say they want to have a 75% tax rate or whatever it is. What is the Republican response? It can't be, well, that's the dumbest idea. What are you going to say about it? It's real. You know, the problem with when we had Obamacare was that the Republicans never proposed anything on health care.
They still have.
So we get very comfortable being again, rather than creating new ideas. And we saw that, I must say, in the 90s, middle of the 90s, we had a lot of good, exciting new ideas. You haven't seen them for a long time. And they got to get in the game with new ideas.
But they're also, I mean, these, it is true, what Van said is right, that there'll be a big debate within the Democratic Party, and they'll end up somewhere on the spectrum on these issues. But they do speak to real-life concerns that people have.
Yeah.
And there are concerns about health care. There are concerns about the cost of higher education. There are concerns about the great aggregation of wealth. I mean, most people in this country have been pedaling faster and faster over the last decade or two, while there's been, most of the growth has been captured by a very small group of people. And that's not to say those are bad people, but it is a problem for the country. And if you can address those things in a serious way, I think you run a very strong risk of losing.
But the Democrats, you notice here, have been retreating from these hard positions of 70% tax rates or Medicare for all. When you ask them about it, you see they're kind of going, whoops, I got to move a little bit this way. And you're seeing it from almost all of them. And so they realize if they get too far out there on the left and he's on the right, then, of course, that opens up that big ocean for your favorite candidate.
Who's my
Howard
favorite
Schultz,
Oh, my God.
One of the issues that the president brought up tonight that got bipartisan applause, that I've said this repeatedly, and I'm working with Senator Chris Dodd on trying to actually come up with some ideas that we can even recommend to the Congress on paid parental leave. And to me, this is an area where the president's for it. Ivanka it's her issue. You saw her jump to her feet and enthusiastic. I'm actually out there doing what you did on criminal justice, which is talking to conservative groups, trying to, and they immediately say, oh, that's a terrible idea. And then you walk through it and they say, oh, okay, if you talk about that sort of makes sense. But if the Democrats come in and say, no, we want everything in the world and we want to spend $100 billion on it, we're not going to get that bill. And so this is where, if you're the real leadership in the House, if Nancy has real leadership in the House and come in and say, look, we can actually make some progress for American families here. We can actually do something strong.
I was happy to hear that. Look,
let's do it. Take the step like you just did.
I was happy. Ivanka Trump was smiling. I was happy to see that because this should bring us together talking about paid family leave. The other economic stuff that was talked about, I felt was a little bit more dicey. He was taking credit for the economy doing really well. I think both.
No president does that.
No. I'm saying. But listen, what I would say about that is, let's be clear that yes, the economy is doing well in a literal straight line from the Obama economy, and I think it's important. What?
Up.
Yeah, straight up.
In a degree, a degree of increase is significant.
No, it's a straight line. So that's one thing. And the other thing I want to say is this: I don't think that we've talked enough about some of the uses, for lack of a better term, that Tree of Life shooting that was referenced. That was a right-wing, white supremacist, anti-Jewish murderer who's not alone. There is a threat in this country that is rising in terms of extreme violence and extremism, and it's not coming from immigrants, it's not coming from socialists, it's coming from this particular growing group of people.
As you know, as we saw afterward, there's as much anti-Semitism on the left as there is. In fact, I would argue there's more anti-Semitism on the left these days than there is on the right.
Here's what I know.
Go to college campuses.
The bullets that are being fired and the people who are being killed too often now by right-wing extremists in our country who sometimes feel encouraged by Donald Trump. It's not his fault. Maybe it's not. But the fact that we aren't even talking about, he's going to mention that, but he doesn't talk about the broader context, I think it was a missed opportunity. I would
like
talked
about anti-Semitism in very strong terms.
He did. I think he sees a political, as we all should.
I think he sees a political opportunity in this issue because he did talk about it a lot. I mean, not that he shouldn't have talked about it. I'm glad that he did. But, this goes to the governor's point about how you behave when you're not giving the State of the Union speech. So when neo-Nazis march in Charlottesville, you can't say there are good people on both sides. And therefore, you have a conflict when you spend so much of your time in the State of the Union, and people have a right to ask, well, what does he actually believe?
Right.
Jim Sciutto actually has the first of a couple of fact checks. So just let's go to him. Jim?
Anderson, you know how central the immigration debate is to not just the speech tonight, but also the coming possibility of another shutdown. So let's get to two of the key claims the president made tonight to justify his positions. Let's start with immigrants and crime. Have a listen to the president.
Year after year, countless Americans are murdered by criminal, illegal aliens.
So you heard the president there. That's the claim, connecting crime to immigrants. What are the facts behind this? Well, a 2018 study by the Libertarian Cato Institute, which reviewed criminal conviction data from the Texas Department of Public Safety, found that immigrants, legal or illegal, are in fact less likely than native-born Americans to be convicted of crime. More broadly, this is the Texas data here. More broadly, there is also generally a decrease in the number of violent crimes across the country. Again, according to the FBI here, other studies have found that murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, they have not increased alongside an uptick in undocumented immigration since 1990. The undocumented immigrants do not contribute to an increase in drug overdoses and DUI deaths, and that young undocumented immigrants engage actually in less crime than their American or legal immigrant peers. Those are the national figures here. As you know, Trump has repeatedly cited crimes committed by undocumented immigrants, both during his presidential campaign and as justification for the desired wall. And this is the second time he's invited family members of victims of crime by undocumented immigrants to the State of the Union address. But is that a key connection? Is that key connection based on the facts? Our verdict here, it is at best misleading. The data does not make that connection. So let's get to border barriers here, because that, of course, very central to the president's desired wall. Listen to the president tonight.
The border city of El Paso, Texas, used to have extremely high rates of violent crime, one of the highest in the entire country, and considered one of our nation's most dangerous cities. Now, immediately upon its building, with a powerful barrier in place, El Paso is one of the safest cities in our country.
So that's the president's claim there, that the wall made the difference in El Paso. That's why it's one of the safest cities in the country. Does the data back that up? According to an analysis of FBI crimes data and city law enforcement data analyzed by the El Paso Times, violent crime in El Paso actually peaked in 1993. It peaked way back here. And between 1993 and 2006, those violent crimes, they fell by some 34%. That border fence, that was authorized many years into this drop, way down here in 2006. Construction didn't actually begin until 2008, wrapped up around then. And according to the El Paso Times, from 2006 to 2011, violent crime in El Paso actually increased a little bit here. So when you look at that data, remember, big drop in crime, but the wall wasn't approved till here, and it wasn't built till here, and you actually see an uptick. This is an easy one for us. The verdict on that claim, false. And this is an example that the president, the White House, has consistently cited as justification for a longer border wall along that border. Anderson?
All right, Jim, we'll come back to you shortly. Coming up, our CNN instant poll of speech watchers, what they thought of the president's address. Stay with us.
CNN's coverage of